Comrades, I stand here today with you as someone who is also sick of the terror perpetrated and the travesties perpetrated continually upon the working class by the parasitic billionaires and their sycophants. The people kidnapped, brutalized, and disappeared by ICE in every single community across the United States, including those shot here in Portland. All of this is a facet of the capitalist system in which we live in.
Well, if you've been paying attention, you've been seeing a lot of media coverage, in fact, a ton of media coverage around ICE. But what we don't seem to be hearing that much about almost at all is the funding and organizing behind the ICE protests. Now, if these were all just peaceful protests, I would say maybe it doesn't matter that much. But the truth is, a lot of these protests are anything but peaceful. And I think it's time to consider who might be behind this. 2020 and BLM wasn't that long ago, but I remember it really well. I was living in Long Beach, and I remember a lot of the rioting and the looting, and I remember even a building being set on fire. I remember that the police weren't helping much, in fact, almost at all. And I remember that a lot of the citizens were trying to help their fellow neighbors, and they were trying to protect small businesses, and it honestly was just mayhem. What is happening now with ICE is very reminiscent of that, and also reminiscent of pro-Palestinian protests that were vandalizing universities not long ago. The question is, what is the common thread behind the scenes, if there is one? Now, I'm not going to claim to have all the answers here because I think it's really quite complex, but I did find some pretty interesting reports recently that I think you should check out. So Craig here is an independent journalist who has recently been on the ground in Minneapolis, and here he is on the Kim Iversen show.
Also, the fact is that right now, a lot of the protesters, they're very much organized, Kim. I think a lot of people don't realize that they're kind of clocking the police and the ICE agents the same way the police and ICE agents are clocking them. In other words, when Renee Good was shot, she was following the ICE agents out of these buildings, and they mark down, they label exactly who they are, and everything's spread out. But they've been able to find out where a lot of the ICE agents, border agents, and federal agents are staying in hotels. And last night, we actually showed up at a protest that was about 25 minutes away from the federal building by car. And it's where Greg Bovino was believed to be staying. And they actually called it an unlawful assembly, cleared the area. And then a second wave of people came in. So everything's spread out. But it seems to be like that quiet, simmer down, then bust open, go crazy. Quiet, simmer down, then bust open and go crazy. The organizers must have a lot of these federal agents spinning on their heads because they're just moving around and they seem to be about 2 steps ahead of everybody else. And
just to further demonstrate what Craig was saying, below is a statement from the Assistant Secretary. Our law enforcement officers are now facing an 8,000% increase in death threats against them and a more than 1,300% increase in assaults against them. Now stick with me, because before I get to who is behind all of this, it's important to get a sense of the impact of all of this and how the organization is playing into it in the first place. Michael Schellenberger, who is a writer and a professor, but also an independent journalist, was just on Tucker Carlson's show, and he gives his perspective from having been part of far-left activist groups.
Physical security starts with knowing the situation you're going into and the situation around you. So context is everything. And one of the things that I found disturbing about the media coverage of this is that they're stripping all the context away. And so you just see a particular moment of Alex Pretti on the ground. You're missing a broader context here. You know, I think it's really important to understand that these are incredibly well-organized efforts to interfere with law enforcement operations by a very sophisticated group of individuals, of nonprofits, of people that have the support from Democratic officials in the state of Minnesota. We saw a manual that they have created for activists to disrupt law enforcement operations. That manual describes how people should, for example, call 911 on ICE officers and deceive the 911 dispatchers into thinking that they're reporting a kidnapping by armed men. that is exceedingly dangerous. I can't emphasize it enough. You're provoking confrontations between different law enforcement officials with malintentions and intention to get people hurt, to create disruption and violence.
A couple days ago, Bill O'Reilly, who is an old-timer pundit and journalist, went on News Nation and broke a pretty big story, in my opinion.
Now, here's the most important part of this whole thing, unreported, okay? There is a man in Shanghai, China, an American citizen. His name is Neville Roy Singham. He works with the Beijing government. He is funneling millions of dollars into the United States of America through 501s like Party for Socialism and Liberation, Democratic Socialists of America, Minnesota Immigration Rights Action Committee. There he is, okay? Connecticut-born, 71 years old, billionaire tech guy. He is funneling money here to these radical organizations who are then agitating professional people, communists mostly, because Singham's a communist, all right, to go in and foster rebellion. You heard that story reported? That is absolutely true. The man has been investigated by the FBI in the past, this Singham character, okay? This isn't some organic thing. This is a foreign power, Beijing, using this American citizen who lives openly in Shanghai in luxury, knowing that this man is funneling tens of millions, probably more, into this country to try to destroy the government.
So I found a few things on him, but there's actually not a ton reported, but I will provide some links in the description. But just to read a little bit from Wikipedia, Neville Roy Singham is an American businessman and social activist. I'll jump down here where Wikipedia pulls some information from the New York Times. Singham is a socialist benefactor of far-left causes and an admirer of Maoism. According to the New York Times, he has provided significant funding for media outlets, organizations, and politicians around the world that promote pro-Chinese government propaganda. According to Jennifer Baker of the George Washington University program on extremism, he has provided funding for U.S.-based pro-Palestinian protest movements. So I'm starting to see a connection. Now, let me jump in here and just say this. This does seem to be a developing story. I believe there's even more players involved here. The New York Times did report on him back in 2023. And I also found some other articles of like the New York Post and the Free Press also reporting on him. Speaking of the Free Press, they posted this video shortly after Maduro's capture and when protests had erupted over that in the United States.
Have you been seeing these hands-off Venezuela protests and wondering who's organizing them? How did they pop up so fast? And why are they defending a brutal dictator? Well, here's the answer. One of the main groups behind these protests is the same organization that helped fuel the pro-Palestine protests across campuses and cities over the last few years. It's called the People's Forum, a far-left activist group based in New York City. And it's funded almost entirely by one man, Neville Roy Singham, a multi-millionaire tech entrepreneur turned Marxist. Singham is married to Jody Evans, the founder of Code Pink, the group best known for storming congressional hearings, smearing fake blood on their hands, and harassing lawmakers in the halls of Congress. Now, let's zoom out. The People's Forum is essentially a headquarters for professional activists. They describe themselves as, quote, a movement incubator for working class and marginalized communities. In practice, from their sleek Midtown Manhattan building, they host classes like Anti-Fascist Theater of the Oppressed, collage making for liberation, and a 6-week course called A Summer School for Socialism. Last year, I began investigating the People's Forum after noticing something striking. They were central drivers of anti-Israel protests immediately after October 7th. One rally they co-hosted took place on October 8th. Just one day after the massacre, before Israel had even finished counting its dead. The People's Forum is also behind protests against National Guard deployments in U.S. cities, anti-ICE, and now Venezuela. Back then, I followed the money, and public disclosure forms and financial records show that Singham and Evans funneled more than $20.4 million to the People's Forum between 2017 and 2022, accounting for nearly all of the group's funding. And they did this using a web of shell organizations and donor-advised funds. And Singham Singham isn't just sympathetic to the Chinese Communist Party. Evidence suggests he's actively funded media outlets that praise Chinese leader Xi Jinping while ignoring or denying China's human rights abuses. So, when you see these protests pop up overnight, now you know they're not authentic or grassroots. They're funded, they're organized, and they're part of a much bigger ideological machine pushing socialism and an anti-American agenda.
Now, I do want to add this one thing about protesters. I believe for many of them it is very genuine, not necessarily saying they're all involved in some big conspiracy. Just simply pointing to the fact that there does seem to be a lot of organization and funding, big money, and strangely ties to the Chinese government. And the other really critical piece to this is to what level is propaganda and maybe even Chinese-backed propaganda playing into this? Now, again, this is complex, and I don't think that this is the entire piece of the puzzle, but I do think this is something we should be talking about and thinking about, and certainly we have to work a little harder to find this because this is not the kind of information that is being amplified across all of the legacy media outlets. Well, if you made it this far, thank you for sticking around. Will you do me a favor? If you got any value out of this, can you hit like and subscribe and maybe share this with a friend that you think might find it interesting? And otherwise, I hope you'll stick around because there's going to be a lot more videos coming up.